Okay,
Looks
so
good.
prescribed fire in the Albany Pine Bush. This picture was actually taken from a management unit called Friendly last summer, which is just south of the Discovery Center on Route 155. I'll come back to it later. So the objectives of the talk today is to give a brief overview of the pine bush. I know most of the people on this call are familiar, so I'll briefly go over what the pine bush is, where it is, why it's protected, and then hopefully answer all these questions: why we burn, when do burns happen, how are they planned, and how are they conducted, spending some time on that last bullet point, going over some of the tactics involved with having a burn. So for any new folks out there, the Albany Pine Bush Preserve is located in between the cities of Schenectady and Albany in eastern New York. The river on the north there is the Mohawk River, and the river to the east is the Hudson River. The Albany Pine Bush is a pitch pine scrub oak barrens. It is a designated National Natural Landmark by the National Park Service. It's important bird area designated by Audubon, a New York State bird conservation area, and it's also home to the federally endangered Karner blue butterfly. Pine barrens are globally rare, and it's a unique ecosystem that exists in Albany, New York, basically because it's a large glacial deposit of sand that was swept into sand dunes, and because of that sandy soil, unique species live and thrive here, and many of them benefit from the disturbance that the fire provides. And inland pine barrens throughout the Northeast have seen their habitat massively reduced basically since the 1960s. And here's a aerial photo of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve area. In the southeast corner of each image, the 52 and the 14, you'll notice Rensselaer Lake, the peninsula there. And as you can see in the 52 image, that was before the interstate highway system, so there's no throughway running through the middle. Also, most of these developments, the Westmere development in the Dunes neighborhood, haven't been built yet, along with Washington Avenue Extension and all the businesses through there, and the City of Albany landfill. And Albany Pine Bush Preserve was created in 1988 by the New York State legislation, and they recognized that it was a threatened community, and decided to set aside some land and protect it. And the preserve currently is 3,300 acres, and it's a mosaic preserve that basically exists between Albany and Schenectady, with the southern boundary basically being Route 20, and then Route 5 to the north, or Central Avenue. So why we burn? We burn for forest health. As I mentioned a couple times, it's fire adapted, and species that live here benefit from the disturbance of fire. The wild blue lupin, which is the food source for the Karner blue butterfly during its caterpillar phase. So Carners only lay eggs on lupin leaves, and then the Carner caterpillars will munch the lupin leaves and then become adult butterflies. And when they're adult butterflies, they'll drink the nectar of any flower. But lupin's a species that needs a lot of sun, so it will be prevalent in the landscape after a burn. And then after you go, like say 3 to 5 years after a fire, eventually the plants will get overshadowed, and you'll need the fire or some sort of disturbance to allow sunlight to hit the forest floor again. Other species like the pitch pines depicted in this image, their cones are semi-serotinous, so they don't need the fire exclusively to open up and release their seeds, but it assists in that process. Other native species like huckleberry and blueberry do very well after fires. And basically the fire is top-killing woody vegetation and allowing sunlight to hit the forest floor once more. Another benefit of having prescribed fires is they reduce the amount of burnable material. You burn off the organic from years past that's sitting on the surface of the forest floor. And that means when you have future prescribed fires, or when a wildfire might occur, they're a lot easier to control because there's less vegetation. And a lot of the work that the Pine Bush Preserve did prior to me getting here in the 90s really reduced the fuel loads, and that makes having prescribed fires a lot more manageable and safer, because there's just less of a buildup. When fires occur, this graph shows total number of burn days, adding up all the burns that we've done at the preserve from 91 to 2019, last year. And you can see the breakdown. So we burn basically in the spring, right when snowmelt occurs, and that'll be either in March or April. And then it starts off with the dormant season, and that's before leaf out. So sunlight will penetrate the forest, dry out the vegetation on the forest floor, and we'll have a spring dormant season that lasts from snowmelt till about the second week of June. Everything in general is fully leafed out in Albany by the second week of June. Then there's a growing season that goes throughout the summer, June through September. And a lot of the burning we do in those months is vegetation that we'd mowed the winter before. So I'll talk a little bit about mow and burns later, but a lot of the summer burns that are represented in this graph were mow and burns. And then there's a shorter fall dormant season that happens when the leaves fall, and from October to December, and there's less of those then, and that's because the angle of the sun is lower. If you guys can remember, normally during the fall, we get full recovery at night, and there's a lot of dew covering the leaves and grass in the morning, and it takes a while for that to evaporate. Not saying you don't get a crunchy, good day to burn in the fall, but there's just less of them. So you can see for us, the primary months of burning at the Pine Bush are mainly the 2 months of April and May, and those are dormant season burns. This graph shows the total number of prescribed fires broken down by day in a year. So each year is represented at the bottom and the number of days that we burned that year. So you can see we've been burning from 91 to 2019, and we range in there from 0 burn days in a couple years to 16 burn days, which is the most we've done in a year, which was last year. So we don't burn that many days here, and that's because of because of the weather parameters in our burn prescription and our proximity to a lot of smoke sensitive areas. This graphic is going to roll through that graph. And what's playing before you is each burn year and the units that were burned. And the green color represents growing season, and the brown color represents dormant. So you have all protected lands in blue, and you can see that we don't burn all of a given location each year. I'll roll through it again. The burns hopscotch or hop around the preserve, and that 99 blob was also due to wildfire escape, so that was why it was such big in one area. But you can see that we're not burning all of the preserve at once. So when we have these fires, they're smaller in size, and we burn in multiple regions each year. So how burns are conducted, the protected lands are shaded out here, and then you can see within the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, there is, it's broken up into what we call management units. So each management unit gets a name, and each management unit has a specific burn plan written for it. What's showing here in red is the planned units we've done or have planned for this year, 2020. And we were successful having 3 dormant season burns before the virus started. These northern units here, Iota, Ignite, and Axle Grease, the ones at the north image, we burned those the first week of March, and also the southwest unit, Custer's Knob, there at the bottom. So the preserve broken out into specific, into geographic areas called management units. And some of the elements of the burn plan are the geography of the unit, what type of fuel is there, or what's the organic vegetation growing there, what's going to be carrying the fire, that's what that means. And then the proximity to smoke sensitive areas, and then crew and weather specs. And each region of the preserve has different smoke sensitive areas around it. So there's different considerations for each one of those polygons. So after we have burn plans approved, the next step would be to go out and create firebreaks. So in the left, you'll see Dave Brickner and Todd Company. Those are our fire techs for this year, and what their job mainly is when we're not burning, along with equipment rehab, is to open up fire breaks of units that we're planning to burn this year, and then also adjacent units, and those will be contingency lines in case fire gets out of the unit that we're burning. That process is done if it's a brand new fire break by using chainsaws to clear a path, mainly a trail through the forest where you can drive UTVs or engines. And if it's already in existence, you just reopen it up with a chainsaw and a tractor. And that image on the right is a fire break being opened up, and that's a first pass through. So we'll go through and we'll mow the fire break with our tractor, and then we'll buck up any heavy fuels laying across the break, and then we'll rake and leaf blow vegetation off of it. So we selected units that we want to burn that year. We start opening up the fire breaks, and then another step that's really important at the Pine Bush is communicating with the public at large. As you saw from those images, we're surrounded by a lot of infrastructure. We're surrounded by communities, retirement homes, and a lot of businesses. So at the start of each fire year, the preserve sends out these postcards, which has, this is an example of one from a couple of years ago. And you'll get this in the mail. And on the back, it has a letter from me with my email and phone number asking if you want to be notified when we're doing prescribed burns to give me a call or email, and we'll add you to a list. This was an example of how we grab addresses. So we'll buffer the management units, and those red dots are all addresses that are within a mile radius of where we're looking to burn, and every dot there would receive one of those postcards. So it's around 7,000 postcards each year. Another way we communicate what we're doing is by the usage of these trailer signs that the stewardship staff puts out. So we'll set that up if we're burning adjacent to a road that's heavily trafficked. Also, sometimes conveying what we're doing to media through press releases, or if they show up through interviews. This is just to highlight some of the notifications that we do. So along with residents and businesses, there's a lot of official notifications. So we call the town supervisors' offices for the town of Colony and Guilderland. We call the mayor's office for the city of Albany. The Thruway Authority, they'll put out those signs, those electronic signs on the highway. We'll call the Albany County Dispatch. We'll call State Police Dispatch. Again, also dispatch for Guilderland Colony. We'll call the airport. We'll call the railroad. We'll call National Grid. And we'll call DEC. This slide just shows the weather parameters. So we've, to back up, we have the units selected that we want to burn this year, those red ones from the map a couple slides back. And Todd and Dave will help me opening up Firebreaks around the units that we're planning to burn. And then we'll wait for in-prescription weather before we email our volunteers and partners. So that chart on the right shows just a list of the management units in Region G, and you can see that they all have a variety of different winds acceptable depending on where they are in that region, and we'll prep a variety of units that have different winds acceptable, so we'll be ready if we do have a nice dry day to go out and burn. When I see a day coming up, or a burn window we call it, I'll send an email out, and that'll be anywhere from 2 days to 7 days ahead of the burn. I'll be like, hey, we see next week Tuesday looks like we're going to have a couple days of drying leading up to Tuesday, and Tuesday looks to be a dry, sunny day with light winds out of an acceptable direction. And I'll send a blast email out to our partners and volunteers and see if anybody will be available to help with the burn that day. That'll also end up the day ahead of time, normally by noon, I'll send a go, no-go email letting everybody know that we're a go for tomorrow and where to meet. Also looking at the weather, this is on the left side of the screen. That's if you go to weather.gov, which is primarily how I plan these burns, you can click on an hourly forecast for your specific area, and it's a really useful tool. The other one that has a nice, that portrays it nice is Weather Underground. But you can look at the top. That red line represents temperature. The middle graph shows wind direction and speed represented in the numbers there. And then the next down shows relative humidity in green, and sky cover in blue, and precipitation potential in brown. And the next graph down is rain, and then the next chart down is mixing height. So this was a burn we did last April. We burned the Crow and the Chief unit, which are outlined in orange here. It might be hard to see, but it's just north of the Pine Haven Golf Course, east of Old State Road and south of the Thruway. And this is where the Old State Road bridge crosses the Thruway that's being worked on right now. So on this day, we were looking to burn the Crow and the Chief unit. The burn window is right here between noon and 3. You can see a really light wind with humidities between 40 and 30%, 65 degrees temperature, and 3,500 feet mixing height, which is good. And also you'll notice that that night, Thursday night, it looks like it's going to start raining into Friday morning and then all day Friday. So another good thing to look for when planning a burn is rain happening right after to assist with any potential mop up. So around the perimeter, these are pictures from the burn. This picture was taken from a commercial plane from former director Willie Janeway. You can see in the image the river to the north. That was that one I pointed out earlier. That's the Mohawk River. Just to the south of the Mohawk River is the Albany Airport, which is that big X there. And then the linear feature in the horizon is the Hudson River. And then Route 5 along just above the smoke column, going from Albany to Schenectady, the New York State Thruway, going to the Cloverleaf down here with 87, and then Western Avenue is the road, or Route 20, that's going basically right down straight towards you from this point of view. And then you can see the golf course and the smoke column that's lifting and dispersing above the highway. The image in the top left is was taken along Old State Road. The image just below that, bottom left, is taken from the southern fire break along the golf course. The image on the top right is the mop-up phase, and the image on the bottom right was from ignitions. So I'll go into the actual burning phase with a different case study with the different unit. But then after the burn is completed, these are just more images that show mop-up. So our crew, that's Todd and Dave there, will go through the unit and extinguish all smoke so we don't create a visual hazard for motorists and also a health hazard for any residents nearby. We don't want to create any nuisance smoke for them. So after that, I'd like to go more into the tactics of what goes into these burns. So I'll just give a brief presentation on the Andromeda unit. Oops. So after I send out the go email and the crew shows up, this is called an incident action plan, and it's a document that contains a map that I hand out to everybody at the burn. So this goes over the goals of the burn, which I talked about a little bit earlier, mainly reducing litter and duff, top killing woody vegetation, reducing mowing slash, and exposing mineral soil. There's a spot weather forecast, which is given by the National Weather Service. The main highlights of that are in this part where it talks about it being mostly sunny with the temperature around 84 max, a min humidity of 42, and a southeast wind of 6 to 15. And the rest of it is later that day and tonight. This blurb here is for the forest rangers to update their dispatch. It gives the township the lat long, the nearest cross street in case of emergency, who owns the land, and the fuel model. And on this specific IAP, I included some historical photos of what the area used to look like. That's the Helleberg escarpment in the background. And then at the bottom, there's a map, and I'll pull that up for you quickly here. So I write down the highlights of the weather on the maps that I give the folks, and that's in the blue, located in the upper left here. Basically sunny, 43% humidity, 82 degrees, and 5 to 10 out of the south southeast. You can see that that wind, I drew it on the map here, is good for this management unit outlined in red, the Andromeda unit, because it's going to push the smoke into the preserve, off of the road, and away from this residential neighborhood on Kings Road, and not towards 155. I also put objectives and hazards on this. I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint now and basically show you how we burned this with that south wind. Mainly what happens is the crew shows up in the morning, and I'll break the crew out into two holding crews. So in this situation, there was a north holding that was tasked with holding from A to B, and then a south holding, which was tasked with holding from A to D to C to B. So again, here is the map. This is what's called test fire. In the image on the left, that's Forest Ranger Hannah O'Connor. And she's holding, that's called a drip torch. And a drip torch is a fuel mixture of diesel and gasoline, 3 parts diesel to 1 part gas. And it's not a torch in the sense that it's like blowing fire. It drips the fuel mixture over a spout, and the gasoline gets the initial punch, and then the diesel lingers a little longer and catches more of the fine organic on fire. So you can see this isn't crazy fire behavior here for the folks that have been on this burn or others. These images were taken about 10 minutes apart, and you can see it hasn't grown very much. They were both taken in the test fire phase, and this is an opportunity for me to observe the fire behavior, observe the smoke column, and make a call on whether it's worth going forward with the burn. Some factors might be if we're getting gusts or wind blowing embers across the line, or it's spreading too fast, we might want to shut it down right here while it's small. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if it's not really consuming and not burning very well, we might just shut it down and say we're better off coming at it another day. You can see here the winds are pretty light, and it's even on this downwind side, it's smoke's lifting and kind of drifting up above the fire break there. So we start the fire with all our apparatus and crew kind of staged around it, ready to go, cycling water in case we need to shut it down. At this point, I'm having Hannah fatten out that corner. So at that tip at A, she's going interior a little bit and creating more black is what it's called. And I'll play an 8-second video just showing kind of what it looks like at test fire. Oops. Apologize there. That was kind of a bad video. I don't know. It was kind of jumping around on my screen, but mainly she's starting to fill out the downwind pocket. After watching that burn, you decided we'd make a go for it. So so we're moving forward with the ignition, and these next images show what it looks like on the south and the north line. So the downwind line is the image on the right. You can see this is what's called blacking out their line. What they're doing there is that fire truck, their fire engine, is putting a wet line down on that fire break because it's what we call a soft break if it doesn't go down to mineral soil totally through it. So that was the mowed line I took a picture of earlier on the tractor. So it was mowed and leaf blown, but there was still burnable material. So in the absence of mineral soil, you put a little water down on that vegetation and then ignite right off the vegetation. So that's what's happening to the right of the picture. The UTV that's parked in the green fuel, just off the line there, they're running drag, and a drag assignment is going in between where the fire is currently burning all the way back to test fire and making sure nothing's creeping across the line. So you can see they're working to increase their depth of black on the north line, and the more black they build, the further embers have to travel in the air, or firebrands, to get out of the unit and land outside and start a fire. You can see on the image to the left, that's on the south line, and what Dave's doing there is he's burning right off the line. The benefit of being on the upwind side is you don't need as many resources to hold that line because you're upwind and the fire is carrying into the unit. You still have to have engines and crew on that side just in case there's a wind shift. But in general, if the forecast is true, the upwind side is a little less stressful than the downwind side, which is pictured on the right. Also, we'd want the downwind side to build quite a bit of black before the upwind side goes. So it's slow at first for the internal igniters and the downwind, the upwind holding crew, because they have to wait for depth of black. This is interior ignition depicted here. This is a little later into the burn, but what's shown here is 3 igniters spread out. So the image on the left is Chris Ricard. He is at the top of the dune pulling fire into the wind. So this is a strip pattern flanking fire where you're walking into the wind. The next igniter down, I actually drove on the 4-wheeler down between Chris. The next image in the middle is Hannah, she's mid-slope. And then the image on the right is Dylan. And all 3 of them are paralleling each other, walking into the wind, laying a straight strip of fire behind them. And those strips of fire are growing out or flanking into each other at a slow pace. This is at 420. This is the B to C line. where we're ringing the unit. So we've completed the north and the south lines basically, and this is the eastern line where we're tying it together. I thought this was a good image because you can see Mike and I think that's Sean there laying a wet line down on that UTV. You can also see the lupin plant in this image, which is again the food source for the Carner blue, which really loves fire. And then that's Amanda Dillon, our field ecologist, laying fire down behind the wet line. And then these next images are just the one in the bottom right is what it looked like later that evening. And some of the guys that were helping with mop up, that's Steve Jackson in the middle image, Dave Nally in the top left, and Tyler Mitchell in the top right. And you can see this also shows some of our equipment here. That top left engine that Nally's sitting on is a Nature Conservancy Type 6. In the middle image, that's our Pine Bush Polaris Ranger UTV, and then the DEC Type 6 is what he's topping off from. And that burn we declared out at 8 that night. And this last video here is a Carner Blue Butterfly the next morning, already in the black. So they had already started to move back into the unit, and we never burn more than a third of a subpopulation at a time. So that's my presentation. I'd like to thank our funding sources, New York State Environmental Protection Fund, Forest Service for Wildland Risk Reduction funding, and then really the staff at the Albany Pine Bush, our partners, New York State DEC, National Park Service, Forest Service, New York State Parks, and all of our volunteers and everybody we work with.